working men and working women of Minneapolis. Our chairman did not overstate the case when he said that the Industrialist Convention, which closed its session today before yesterday in Chicago. What the fuck was that sentence? Okay. In Chicago after 2 weeks of arduous labors. Arduous labors. Marks an epoch in the annals of the labor movement of America. I might add, although his words imply as much, that the Chicago Convention marks also a turning point in the history of the land. What was done there? You will be able to obtain an approximate idea, a hint, from the public declaration, the preamble to the Constitution adopted by the Convention. The document, in short, I shall make that shortness still shorter by picking out just 3 of its clauses. The clauses which I consider most important, and by the light of which the significance, not only of all the others, not only of the document itself, but of the movement which uttered it may be appreciated, gauged, and understood. The 3 clauses are these. There can be no peace so long as hunger and want are found among millions of working people, and the few, who make up the employing class, have all the good things in life. The second clause declares, the working class and the employing class have nothing in common. And lastly, but not least, the third clause is as follows. Between these 2 classes, a struggle must go on until all the toilers come together on the political as well as the industrial field and take and hold that which they produce by their labor through an economic organization of the working class without affiliation with any political party. These 3 clauses I propose to take up with you in the order in which I have read them. The first clause. I consider the clause pivotal. Does it state a truth? Does it state a falsehood? Is it true that the condition of the working class is one of hunger and want, or is it a contrary statement, heard so often? The correct one. Upon this subject, the men engaged in the social question are irreconcilably divided. Deep is the cleft that divides them. On the one side stand those who were gathered or were represented at Chicago. They maintain that the condition of the working class is one of hunger, want, and privation, that from bad is getting worse and ever worse, that the plunder levied upon the mouths ever higher, that not only does their relative share of the wealth which they produce decline, but that the absolute amount of wealth that they enjoy shrinks to ever smaller quantity in their hands. That is the socialist position. Over against that position is the position of our advertisers of various stripes, from the outspoken capitalist down to the AF of L-ite. They assert that the condition of the working class is one of well-being. They claim that from good is getting better and even better. They maintain that both the absolute amount of wealth that the working man enjoys and his relative share of wealth that he produces is on the increase. Some of them, like the English organ of the New Yorker, Volkszeitung Corporation, Volkszeitung, I don't know German, the Worker of February 5th this year, go so far in their assault upon the socialist position as to pronounce a wild exaggeration. They claim that the capitalist system filches from the working class 4/5 of all that class produces. The 2 positions are irreconcilable. Fucking words, man. If the latter be true, or even approximately true, then the 2 other clauses that I am considering from the preamble, A, the preamble itself together with the whole work of the Chicago Convention, fall like the baseless fabric of nightmare. Contrariwise, if the former, if the socialist position is true, then all the rest are conclusions that cannot be escaped, and the Chicago Convention, built upon solid foundation, all accordingly centers upon this first clause. Is it true? Is it false? Let us see. Let me introduce you to this document. You will find it excitingly interesting. It is entitled, as you see, Uncle Sam's Balance Sheet. As you noticed, it is full of figures. Be not alarmed by them. I shall need but 2 of these columns. The last 2 for my purpose. I have not cut out of others, in order to not lay myself open to the charge of presenting a garbled document. This poster is intended to give both statistically and empirically a convincing presentation of the progress in affluence made by the people of this country. Let me introduce you a little closer to the document. The columns of figures that you see were not gathered by me. They were not gathered by any socialist, quite otherwise. This document was issued or circulated by the National Committee of the Republican Party during last year's presidential campaign. Seeing, moreover, that on this first column are given the successive Democratic and Republican administrations that presided over the nation's destiny during the last 50 years. It is fair to consider that the statistical the pictorial. Why are you having so many weird words that I don't use? Okay. Presentation of conditions cast upon the canvas is the joint product of both the ruling parties. You may ask why I trot before. Holy shit. You may ask why I trot before you. You know, Marxists.org have a fucking bad translation, I hope. I hope they didn't take this from the SLP website, because then they're fucking stupid. It's gonna be before, and you say B and then 4. It's fucking confusing. You may ask why I trot before you the figures of the foe. Why not represent you with my own? I shall tell you. If I say John Jones is a thief, the charge may or may not be believed. I would have to prove it. But if John Jones himself that he is a thief, then I am saved all further trouble. It is a fundamental principle of the law of evidence that a man's own testimony against himself is the best evidence possible. By taking that poster before you, I have clapped the highest spokesman of the capitalist class upon the witness stand. They cannot go back upon their own words. I propose to make them the convicts of themselves. I must earnestly request you to desist from applauding. The heat in this hall with this vast audience is intense. We must all be obnoxious to get out as soon as possible. These frequent interruptions by applause only deter the hour for our joint deliverance. So yeah, people apparently loved him. Oh god, they should have cut off this. There is one more thing I wish to introduce you on this document before I take up the figures. As stated, the document is intended to be pictorial, besides a statistical presentation of affairs. Let me invite your attention to this picture on the poster's extreme left. You will notice it is Uncle Sam, but how lean, how hungry, how poor, how shabby, how scraggy he looks. That is supposed to represent the country as it started. Now look at the other picture of the poster's extreme right. You will notice a goatee and other tokens that is still Uncle Sam, but how changed? No longer are his clothes in tatters. They must be of good material because they do not burst, despite his immense girth. He has a gay, jaunty appearance. Oh god. Oh god. From a modern perspective, that's funny. Judging from that, from the tip of his hat, the twirl in the feather that surmounts it, and the twinkle in his eye, he is probably on a spree, half overseas, his face shining with the oil of the continent. That picture is intended to symbolize the country today. Now let us find out who this Uncle Sam is. The working man or the idle man, the capitalist. The figures will tell us exactly. The first column is headed Product of Manufacture. It gives, from decade to decade, the value of manufactured goods in the country, from 1860 down to 1900. I shall not read of the figures in details. They will be much too cumbersome to carry in your minds, nor is that necessary. I shall mention them only in round numbers. For the decade of 1860, the value of manufactured products amounted to nearly 2 billion in lump sum. For the decade of 1870, it amounted for over 4 billion. For the next decade, it amounted to over 5 billion. For the decade following, 1890, it was over 9 billion. Finally, the decade of 1900, the value of manufactured products was over 13 million. This is a magnificent progression. As you will notice, from nearly 2 billion in 1860, the wealth produced by the labor rose steadily, until in 1900 it reached the gigantic figure of nearly 7 times as much, 13 billion. This, no doubt, indicates a vast increase of wealth with a corresponding potential increase of well-being. So far so good. But be warned in time, the existence of a good thing is no evidence of its being enjoyed by the working class. I must right here request to get your thinking caps ready. Let me take an illustration. Suppose I say that in this hall with thousands of people, there is 10,000 to be found. The fact alone is no indication as to how that 10,000 is distributed. It may be that, on an average, each one have about 10. It may also be that of that 10,000, I alone have $9,999.99 in my pocket, in which case a lone copper would be left to strangle in the pockets of the remaining 999 people in this hall. This first, holy shit, I mean, he really knew that you had, okay, it's an example, but you know. The first column of the poster informs us what the value is of the goods produced. It does not tell us how that wealth is distributed. It only gives us an idea of the increasing magnitude of labor's productivity. As to distribution, it is to the next column that we must look. And now make ready for the exciting interestingness that I promised you. The next column is headed Wages paid. Here also the amounts are summed up from decade to decade. I shall run over them again in a lump. In the decade of 1860, the total wages paid to the working man was over 300 million. In the next decade, 1870, the total wages rose 400 billion and 60. They were over 700 billion. In the decade of 1880, they rose by 200 million more. They amounted to over 900 million. In the 1890s, the increase in total wages was double. The wages to the working man was over 1,800 million. Finally, in 1900, the wages was over 2,300 million, or 500 million more than in 1890. If we take the bird's eye view of this column, its purpose is obvious. The way the figures are arranged, that they meant to convey two ideas. First, that the share of the individual working man is vast. Secondly, that his rise toward affluence is steady and still vaster. It is expected that when a working man is told or sees, black upon white, that in 1860 his class received the gigantic pay of over 300,000, he feels quite sure that he has a big chunk of that amount. The largeness of the total is intended to act as an opiate on his feverishly pinched purse, and when black upon white, that initial total is seen to swell and double from decade to decade until it reaches the giddy height reached in 1900. Then he is expected to be so thoughtfully dazed and muddled that he knows not whether he stands upon his feet or his head, and is utterly incapable of thinking. The gigantic wealth that is supposed to be his positively crazes him. Now let's look closer at these figures. From now on until I get through with this poster, I must ask you, put your thinking caps on and keep them tied firmly to your head. Whenever figures of wages are presented to you, you must submit them to two tests. Not until you have done so will the figures convey to you any practical information. I propose to submit with you this column of wages to the two tests that I have in mind. The first test is to ascertain the relative size, or percentage, that the wages bear to the total wealth produced. The test is easy. It merely involves a plain arithmetical calculation. Any 14-year-old child should be able to do the sum. Let us apply the test. The posters inform us that in the decade of 1860 the wages paid were over 300 million. It also informs us that the wealth produced by labor during that same period was nearly 2 billion. Applying that arithmetical calculation to the two full sets of figures, we ascertain that the wages were 20% of the wealth produced. Now we are in possession of that fact. It is not a very sharing fact, but it is a useful fact to know. It is the first fact that conveys practical information. In this light, the huge total wage of over 300,000 shrinks to its social dimensions. We now know from the figures given by the poster itself that in 1860, out of every $100 that he produced, the working man got only $20. Somebody else got $80. From what we learned that in 1860 the working man was plundered out of $80 for every $100 of worth of wealth that he brought into existence. Immediately a suspicion arises in our minds as to who this fat and fistful Uncle Sam must be. But we snuff out the suspicion. 20% of one's product is not much, indeed, it is so very little, but we remember that this is only a start, and that the soaring figure promises progress. Encouraged by this hope, we proceed to test the next decade. Applying the same arithmetical calculation to the figures given on the poster for the decade of 1870, we again ascertain that the percentage of labor's share, the relation that the increased total wage bear on the increased total production. What we there discover gives such a shock on our nerves that the pencil almost drops from our hands. Remember that in the previous decade the share of labor was 20%. Remember also that we were promised progress. The expectation started by the promise justified the hope that we would be getting at least 1% more. Vain hope. The share of labor, as brought out by a test of the figures furnished by the poster itself, is 18%. A curious progress. It is the progress of the cow's tail downward. In the 1860, the share of labor was $20 out of every $100 worth of wealth that is produced. In 1870, we find that its share has gone down to 18%. In 1860, the plunder levied on the working man was 80 out of every 100. In 1870, the plunderer, as revealed by the figures furnished by the poster itself, is 82 out of every $100 worth of wealth produced by the working man. In suspicion started in our minds by the revelations in 1860 as to who the stout and lusty Uncle Sam is, revives. But again we suppress it. Our hopes are buoyed up by the consideration that many a babe, instead of immediately growing, it is assailed through the whooping cough, measles and bronchitis, and declines. but only temporarily. He rallies quickly and then grows strong uninterruptedly. That may have been the case with us in 1870. Shared by these thoughts, we rush on to the next decade. Again, we apply the simple arithmetic calculation. Now the figures on the wages and the wealth produced by the decade of 1880. The percentage traced by our pencil looks absurd. We must have made a mistake. We go over to the sum once more. No mistake. The working man's share in 1880 is lower than 20% that it was in 1860. It is lower than the 18% that it was in 1870. It is now 17%. Arrived at this point, we are no longer able to suppress the suspicion as to who this round and jolly Uncle Sam is. Nevertheless, we do not yet lose heart. Still mindful of the promise held out by the poster regarding our progressive affluence, we proceed to the following decade. The same arithmetical calculation is gone through. We compute the ratio of the wages paid in 1890 to the wealth produced in that decade. Lo, a surprise! The decline has stopped. The percentage of labor's share in 1890 have risen above the percentage in 1880. It has risen above the percentage in 1870. It is now again 20% as it was in 1860. Thankful for small favors, we look back, having expected another decline in our agreeable surprise almost make us feel happy. Nevertheless, we wonder where this progress comes in. The figures furnished by the poster itself reveal that we are in 1890 just where we started in 1860. After 30 years of arduous toil, after 30 years during which the soil of the land was literally drenched with the sweat and blood and marrow of the working man, after 30 years during the American working class produced more heirs to the square inch than the working class of any other country, to purchase European noblemen for husbands. At the end of 30 years during which the working class, as this poster itself shows, produced a phenomenal amount of wealth. At the end of these 30 years, the American working class is just where it was 30 years before. The rest retainer of only $20 out of every $100 worth of wealth that it's produced. And this is hardly a progress worth bragging about. It is conservatism of misery. Nevertheless, hope springs eternal in the human breast. Perhaps the long lean years are last over. Perhaps a brighter day is suddenly to burst upon us, and we are suddenly to make up for lost time as to look in 1900 like this affluent, well-fed, well-clad, jolly Uncle Sam, who according to the poster typifies the worker. And so we apply the test to the figures of 1900. The last one furnishes on the poster. The same arithmetical calculation is resorted to. Woe is us, our hopes are dashed. The percentage of the share of labours comes down curslap. It is as low as it ever was, 17%. It was temporarily risen in 1890, but as the flickers in a dying man's eye, the persecutor of collapse. The lie attempted to be given to the Socialist regarding the outrageousness of the plunder that he maintains to the working class is subjected to by the capitalist class, rolls down the throat of its utterer, even making allowance for the value of imported raw material to which the labour of other countries have given value. Even making generous allowance for all that due allowance should be made for. The figures to which this poster testifies establish the conclusion that the pittance of 1/5 of its product is a liberal estimate from the share that the working class is allowed to retain. The first of the two tests to which these figures of wages paid must be put dispels their halo. Fucking hell. It exposes a good portion of the naked and hideous reality. it points to the conclusion that not this lusty Uncle Sam, but that the other miserable being on the other side of the poster typifies the American working man. The second test will establish the fact beyond the peradventure. Let me go once more over the figures in the columns of wages paid, as so to refresh our memory. The wages paid in the manufacturing industries here are given to us. 300 million for 8060, over 700 million for 8070, over 900 million for 8080, over 1 billion 800 million for 8090, and over 2 billion 300 million for 1900. The purpose of such a presentation of the run of wages is obvious. The intention is to convey the idea that the condition of the individual working man improves, that it has improved gigantically. The presentation of figures in that way is intended to convey the idea that the wages or earnings of the individual working man has soared upwards. And to convey the idea crushingly, I shall provide you from the attitude of this witness, whom I have pained to understand, that this purpose is to obtain a snap judgment upon the imperfect information that he is guilty of, that worst form of deception which consists in stating a half-truth and suppressing the other half. In short, that is a swindler. Keep your thinking caps tight on your heads. It is the fact that in 8060 the output in wages amounted to 300 million, and that in 1900 the output ran up to 2 billion more. Is this fact enough to warrant any conclusion as to the improved condition of the working man? Let me illustrate with a simple instance. Suppose I were to tell you that in last month I paid out $10 in wages, and that this month I am paying out $20 in wages. I would now be paying out double the amount in wages that I paid out last month. Does that mean that my working men are now getting twice as much wages as they did last month? They may, and they may not. Whatever they do or do not depends not merely upon the increased total of the wages paid. It depends on something else. Besides, what is that something else? Obviously the number of men that I employed last month and the number of men that I employ this month. If last month I employed only 2 men, it would mean that their wages would have averaged 5 apiece. If this month, however, I am employing 10 men, then, although the total amounts that I am giving now paging out in wages doubled, the wages of my men would have gone down by over 50%. The total wage may rise mountain high, and yet the individual wage may decline perpendicularly. I'm just gonna say that this doesn't really happen now, I think. I think it was like a problem before, but now that's not really happening anymore. That you like you give $5, especially with like you have a minimum wage and shit. But the other fact that is stated before, that your decline in share of the labor you produce is pretty shit, especially in minimum wage jobs. Okay, let's now bring this column of dazzling figures paid out in wages to the touchstone of the principle that I have just elucidated. Fucking words, man. The first thing noticeable is the total absence from this, or from any other columns on the poster, of any statement with regard to the number of men among whom these successive grandiose figures have been divided. No statement of their number for 8060, no statement of their number for 8070, no statement of the number for 8080, no statement of their number for 8090, no statement of their number for 1900. The witness on the witness stand is dodging. He is prevaricating. He is perjuring himself. We should not need no more than that to know what to do in his case. Nevertheless, I do not propose to convict him by any indirection. I proposed to convict him explicitly. Explicitly. The census furnished by the agents of the identical class that got up this poster informs us that in 1870 there were 2,053,966 working men employed by the manufacturing industries. The wages paid to them according to this poster were 775,584,343. That's quite a number. By dividing the total number of workers to whom these wages were paid into that amount, we obtained the figure of 377 as the average annual wage for that decade. Stick a pin there. In the next decade, 1880, when the total wage stated on this poster was 947,953,785, they were, according to the census of consensus, 2,732,595 working men engaged in manufacturing. Dividing this figure into the grand total of wages, we shall obtain the average wages paid then, and thereby also an idea of the worker's condition. The figure obtained is 346, $31 less than before. Although the total wage has risen during the last 10 years, about 200,000, the individual wages went down $31. I'm gonna think about this. This may happen now. I need to do some research on that, actually, because, but I don't know if, okay, I guess that wasn't as known then too, that like, oh, wages go down. But I mean, individual wages never go down. I mean, general wages do normally never go down, like the total wages. Okay. We proceed to the following. The decade of 1890. For that period, the poster gives 1,891,228,321 as the wages paid. He said that as 1 billion before, which is kinda dishonest. They should have said 2 billion because that's closer. Fucking yeah. Oh well, that's. Oh, maybe they didn't. I'm fucking confused here. Wait. Okay. No wait. He maybe didn't. Actually, no wait. It should be 900. Oh well, fuck. We can talk about that later, but I think that was like a liberal estimate anyway, which was pretty shit. So it was actually worse than he said. But no, the census informs us that the amount must have been distributed among 4 million. Holy shit, the working class is growing. 4,251,535 working men. Again, dividing this number into the total wage paid to them, we obtain 445 of the average wages. This denotes a rise. What these absolute rises amount to, that they vanish like mist before the sun, that they are a snare and a delusion, in fact a cheat that I shall make clear presently. For the present, sticking closely to the present line of inquiry, we shall consider it an absolute gain. So considering it, it is legitimate to contrast the gain made by the working men with the absolute gain made by the class who we now know this fat Uncle Sam represents. After 20 years of such toil as I needed to describe to you, we find that the wages of the average working man increased by the giddy amount of $68 a year, or 19 cents more a day. While the small class that is jolly costumer, this rotten Uncle Sam here represents progressed during that same period with only the to the tune of the modest figure of 3,228,883,529, and there were no 4 million of them among whom to divide that little windfall. We proceed to the next and last, the decade of 1900. Wait, did he start from like 1880? Yeah, he did, that's why I got confused before. Oh well. When, according to this poster, the total wages paid were 2,330,578,010, and according to the census, they were 5,306,143 working men engaged in the manufacturing industries. Dividing the latter figure into the former, we obtain the average wages received by the working men. It was 439, $6 less than in 1890. Take notice, notwithstanding the total amount of wages paid had increased by 439,349,689, a lot of nines. The actual earnings of the average working man had decreased by $6. I stated a minute ago that the average increase in wages credited to the individual working man are paper increases, and I promise to prove it. I shall proceed to do so now. As we have seen, the wages declined $6 between 1890 and 1900. Nevertheless, the figures actually show that from 1870 to 1900 there is an increase in the average wage amounting to $62 a year. Even if this paltry figure could stand, it would be a mockery. What else but a mockery is an increase of $62 a year? After 30 years of toil, for the class the sweat of whose brow and marrow of those bone raised the total wealth during that period, the gigantic figure of $8,806,954,124. It is a tragic mockery. There is but a step even from the tragic to the ridiculous. I shall prove to you that even the paltry $62 increase dwindles down to the proverb holy fucking shit, proverbial 30 cents. The line of argument that I shall now take up is a submission of that second test to which I have been submitting to this column of wages paid, and which knocked the bottom from under it. The secondary test to which I shall now submit it will smash the remaining fragments. I must request you to not drop your thinking caps, you will need them. You saw how misleading, because insufficient, were all comparisons of wages paid at different epochs. Without a simultaneous statement of the number of wage earners, among whom the wages were distributed in the respective periods, I shall now prove to you how such comparisons of wages paid at different epochs, even to the identical wage earner, are also misleading, and given with intent to deceive, unless other factors are considered. Let me begin the argument on this head with an illustration. Say that last year my wages were $1 a day, and this year my wages are $1.25 a day. It is the mere fact that I am receiving a cash 25% more than last year sufficient premises from which to conclude that this year I am better off by 25 cents worth of wealth. Not necessarily. He's gonna say that, basically. Let me help you to answer by giving you a further illustration. Suppose that last year, when my wages were 100 cents, the cost of living, rent, food, clothing, the absolutely necessaries. Try to say that 10 times. of life was 99 cents, what would follow? It would follow that I had only that I had a penny over and above my wants. I could either put that in the savings banks or invest it in stocks, as we are told that working men do extensively. But suppose further that now, when my wages are 125 cents, the cost of living has gone up so as to run to 126 cents. What is the result? The result is that I am busted. This doesn't necessarily happen, but I'm just gonna. I don't think he will take that up, but the cost of living standards will obviously go up. Like every year, it will go up. So the wage isn't really enough. Most likely, you're not gonna change at all. Sometimes it go down, sometimes it go up. It is complicated, but this is like just a illustration of it. You see the point. He who tells us that our wages have gone up without stating how the cost of living is conducting itself. Such a man is attempting a fraud upon us. That once more is the case with a witness who I have nailed on his board. On that subject also he is silent as the tomb. His silence, however, need not leave me in lurch. I don't need him. I shall, with your consent, turn you into living statistical columns. Oh god. I should probably add to that the like general cost of living of like everyone have not really gone up in the West. The only thing is like, oh, we got more stuff really, but we don't got any real wealth, really more wealth. It's just more stuff that we are quote unquote required to do. Oh well. I request all those of you, the women included, who certainly know a good deal on this head, all those of you whose experience is that the cost of living is now lower than it was 20 or 10 years ago, to raise your hands. I shall request the chairman to count the hands. I shall now request all those to raise their hands whose experience is that the cost of living is now just what it was 20 or 10 years ago, no lower and no higher. Kindly raise your right hands. Those of you who can testify to that, I shall again request the chairman to count the hands. I shall take a third poll. Let all those raise their hands whose experience is that the cost of living have gone up and gone perceivability. Will the chairman count? From the Atlantic across and beyond the Mississippi, that is the identical response I have everywhere received from the audiences that faced me. Beginning with rent, the necessaries of life have everywhere gone up. There is a big chunk, the bulk, probably even more, that wondrous $62 increase in wages since 1876. I shall now proceed to knock out whatever fraction may possibly still remain of the increase. You have seen that knowledge of the cost of living is indispensable in order to form a correct idea as to whether an increase in wages mean improved conditions. You have seen that there may be an increase in wages, and yet no proportional improvement in conditions if the cost of living has increased. What the fuck? Intimately connected with the subject of the price paid in goods is the subject of the quality of the goods. Again, let me illustrate before entering upon the subject itself. Suppose that 20 years ago I paid $10 for a suit of clothes, and that suit lasted me 2 years. Say 2 winters now, say 2 winters. Now, suppose again that this year a suit of clothes that looks as good lasts me only 1 year, say 1 winter. What does that show in point of price? It shows that whereas 20 years ago a $20 bill furnished me with clothing for 2 years, now a $10 bill furnishes me with clothing for only 1 year. In other words, if I do not wish to be in rags the second year, the clothing that 20 years ago cost me $10 now cost me $20. The conclusion from this fact is that deterioration of goods spells increased price. On the face of things, the price has remained what it was. In point of fact, it went up. Now then, both in food and clothing, the extent to which deterioration had gone during the last 20 years staggers imagination. The reports of the shoddy turned by our factories would be incredible were they not so well authenticated. This is a matter of general experience. It is particularly the housekeeper who makes acquaintance with this fact. Inquire from any woman 50 years old today and she will be able to tell you upon the subject tales that are sad. One elderly housekeeper whom I interrogated upon the subject put it in this way. When I married and bought a suit of underclothing for Henry, it lasted 2 years, often longer. Now when I get any underclothing, I have to start darning the darn thing from the time it is put on. Similarly with food, there is hardly an article of food, especially the food that the working man can afford to buy, that is not adulterated. Consequently, that has not deteriorated in quality. Essays galore are cropping up upon the extent of which the painful practice has gone. These essays show that health is thereby undermined. Even in a life, it is not thereby speedily snuffed out. One of these essays of recent date claimed that the food adulterations are directly responsible for the death of over 400,000 infants a year. And that's fucking more. That's less than this fucking now. Holy shit. Fucking Christ, people are dying like flies in the US. And it traces the sickness and death of thousands upon thousands of adults to the same cause. Some fucking dick is spamming my phone. Who the fuck is this? Oh yeah, there's some... Okay, I think they removed him now. Okay, let's go back. Never mind. Okay, we can... So... Let me quote another authority upon this head. You will find on page 132 of the Congressional Record on the date of last December 12th the following passage. It is a passage from the speech delivered by Senator Stewart in the course of debate on the food bill. I do not think the country has any idea to the extent of the positions that are administered in the food that is sold and eaten in this country. I think it is sapping the foundation of the constitution of our people. If we had to raise soldiers now as we did in 1861, I do not believe that throughout the country we could find as large percentage of young men fit to hard service as there were at that time. The proof of the pudding in this is, as in everything else, ever lies in the eating. If wages really increase and the cost of living does not rise, and the necessities of life, food and clothing does not deteriorate, if they remain good or even improve, what must be the result? Obviously, the people who enjoy them must be hale and hearty. They must be healthy while they live, and their lives must be long. If on the contrary earnings barely increase, and that increase is more than eaten up by higher prices, and by the deterioration of such necessities of life as food and clothing, the fact is bound to appear in the condition of the class that is affected thereby. If you are ever in New York, take a walk in the evening on the 42nd Street, on Fifth Avenue, where the clubs are located in the Republican and Democratic parties, and of the several other capitalist societies. There must be similar clubs here in Minneapolis. They are found in all of our large cities, even in some smaller manufacturing towns. Peep through the large pier glass windows into the gorgeous precincts. You will see grey heads abound. Is it that these gentlemen are prematurely grey? Is it that they are so poorly fed and clad that it has turned their hair? Hardly. I admit that their aged appearance is somewhat to be accounted for by their lives of dissipation and their covert Mormon practices. Nevertheless, they have reached old age. Such is the good quality of the goods that they consume that all of their dissipations and immoral practices do not prevent their reaching old age. Having taken in that sight, move into the wards which the working class inhabits, and drop into the places where working men congregate. Make sure and take along a little pad of paper and pencil. On that pad note down a tally mark for every grey head that you come across. You will find few indeed on the record. Why, look at this assemblage of working men. There is hardly a grey head among them in the assemblage of half this size. But of capitalists, you would find the grey heads numerous. Among working men they are far and few between. Is it because the working men are so well fed and so well clothed that their hair preserves its color even into old age, and thus conceals their years? Oh no. The grey heads are far and few among them because their hair is not giving a chance to turn. Long before the season they have sunk into early graves, the victims of intense toil, aggravated by small earnings, and in this turn aggravated by the adulteration of the goods that alone their earnings can purchase. An interesting sidelight is thrown upon this subject by the official report recently made to his government by the British Consul in Chicago. Speaking of the machinist in particular, it said that if a machinist in the United States is 42 years of age and out of work, it is difficult for him to get a job, and he proceeds to explain why. Said he, if the man has worked as hard as he is expected to, then he is worn out at 42. If he is not worn out, then it is a sign that he did not work as hard as he is expected to, and they have no use for him either way. I wish to furnish one more piece of testimony under this head before I dismiss the subject. The man I am about to quote is not a fair-brand agitator. Although he often spoke in public, his subject never was of the sort that might tempt a man to exaggeration. It is Huxley, the slow, plodding, accurate scientist. It is said that 4/5 of the people die of slow starvation. There may be those among you who are of a statistical turn of mind. If such there be, there may have nosed among the statistics of mortally furnished by the census and other official sources. Such friends of statistical turn of mind may say, "Why, that's nonsense. A man or two may occasionally die of starvation, but hundreds and thousands of them, impossible." I have seen the statistics of mortality. I have seen the list of diseases. There are consumption, pneumonia, all sorts of diseases. But I never saw starvation entered among these causes of death. People of holding such views are in serious error. A man may be dying of slow starvation and not know it. His stomach may be full. He may never have felt the ignorance of hunger, and yet he may be dying of slow starvation. If in summer a man is not properly clad, he is emitting more heat than his system can stand. He is dying of slow starvation. If in winter he is not clad warm enough, he is consuming more heat than his system can afford. He is dying of slow starvation. His stomach may be replete. He may imagine himself well fed. But if the matter in that the stomach is adulterated food, then the organisms that carry the nutrition from the stomach and spread out it throughout the body find no nutrition to carry. The tissues are consumed or only partially replaced, and the man is dying of slow starvation. The fact is brought home to him when it is too late. It is concealed from him, from his friends. Even then, he catches a cold. A robust constitution would cast off the dissenter without difficulty. His constitution, however, is not robust. His constitution has long been drained by slow starvation. The slight distemper throws him on his beam ends. It develops into pneumonia. He dies. The physician reports pneumonia as the cause of death, but starvation it was. And so down the line of consumption, rheumatism, diabetes, and most of the other ills plentiful bestowed upon the working class by the increased wages. The capitalist class lavishes upon the working class, because never lose sight of this fact. It is the identical capitalist class which regulates wages on the one hand, and on the other hand raises the costs of living, and adulterates the goods needed to live on, which, as you saw, is another form of raising prices. We are, though, with a witness, is then convinced out of his own mouth. The condition of the working class has gone from bad to worse. Not this roly-poly of an Uncle Sam, but that other, immediate being typifies the wage earner of the land. Some say, and I am one of those, that craft or pure and simple unionism has promoted, urged these worst conditions. Others, I know, claim that pure and simple craft unionism is not to be held responsible. They claim that, on the contrary, were it not for pure and simple unionism, conditions would now be even worse. Those who are of this opinion hold that, instead of being decried, pure and simple unionism should be praised for what it does. Even accepting this, the most favorable summary possible of the work of pure and simpledom, it would follow that pure and simpledom is, at best, a brake to check the downward run of the chariot of labor. It will follow that pure and simpledom not only utterly incompetent to emancipate the working class, but that it is not even able to prevent decline. That all there is in a capacity to slacken or reduce the downward trend of things, even accepting this most favorable of views. It would be an argument to cast the thing aside. The mission of unionism is not to act as a rear guard to an army defeated, seasoned in defeat, habitated to defeat, and fit only for defeat. The mission of unionism is to organize and drill the working class for final victory, to take and hold the machineries of production, which is the administration of the country. I shall, however, prove to you that pure and simpledom deserves no credit whatever. I shall prove that it is directly responsible for existing evils, that it is a compliance in capitalist crime, and has become a scourge to the working class. So this was part 1 of 3, I think I will do, about the socialist reconstruction of society. The first part is like, how capitalism, I guess people would say it's like, the iron law of wages or whatever, but it's the like showing of capitalism strength, really. The introduction of capitalism, how capitalism lives, and how the working class is really exploited by the bourgeoisie, which is basically what this first part is showing, as the first class was. The first class of there can be no peace as long as hunger and want are found among millions of working people, and the few who make up the employing class have all good things in life. Which is true even to this day, even though it may not even be as clear, even if it wasn't even clear then. People are still starving, dying from slow starvation, as he said. I mean, some may say it's like, iron law of wages, because people like to say that about him. But I mean, it is pretty the last time. Yeah, as stated, one of three parts. Yeah.